Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to episode 67 of Contemplating Life. Before I got interrupted by health issues last month, I planned to do 3 episodes about my life as a fan of auto racing, especially the Indy 500. It was all scheduled to finish up right before this year's race on Memorial Day weekend. Well, that didn't work out. So this week we pick up where we left off talking about racing. By the way, the YouTube version of this episode contains video I shot with a home video camera at the Speedway, so you might want to watch this one on YouTube. After writing our previous episode on the topic, I've refreshed my memory about some of the events at the Speedway. I mean, we're talking about things 50, 40 years ago. My memory's not that good. I wasn't sure how much time I spent at the track during my high school years because I was in school throughout the week. Now, while it was common practice for kids to cut school during May to go to the track, I didn't have that option. Mom put me on the school bus in the morning and transported me from Roberts Special Ed School to Northwest High School in the middle of the day. So it wasn't like I could sneak away unless she was going to sneak away with me. I finally recalled definitively that I spent some qualifying weekends at the Speedway. Mom would drop me off at Gate 7 early in the afternoon and pick me up around 5 or 6. The track closed at 6. One day, as I was going through the tunnel under the main stretch at Gate 7, my right rear tire came off the rim. This had to be the power chair I had gotten from the school starting in 5th grade. I used it from then until halfway through my senior year. We knew I'd have to return the chair once I graduated, so we got my dad's insurance to buy me a new one sometime in December of 1972. So the day my tire fell off, that had to take place while I still had the power chair that belonged to the school, because my new chair had different kinds of tires that didn't come off the rim so easily. The old chair from the school had solid rubber tires about 1 inch wide on a rim that was probably 24 inches in diameter or so. In the center of the rubber core was a steel cable. When replacing the tire, you would tighten the cable to keep the rubber on the rim. But as the tire wore down, that steel cable started cutting into the rubber. The tire would no longer fit as tightly as it should have. If you turned the chair sharply or hit a bump funny, sometimes it would twist that rubber tire off the rim. So I was going through the Gate 7 tunnel down a steep hill on one side and starting to drive up the steep hill on the other side. That put a lot of strain on this worn-out tire, and it twisted off the rim. If it had fallen outwards onto the ground, I probably could have limped along on the rim and gotten up the hill to meet my mom. Unfortunately, it fell towards the inside, against the wheelchair. As I rolled along the rim, the tire got tangled up in the clutch lever. There was a lever on each wheel that you could disengage. It would loosen the belt drive so you could push the chair by hand. When the tire flipped the clutch lever, I was stranded at the bottom of the tunnel. I could see my mom pull up outside the tunnel, and she looked down the tunnel to try to see me. But she was in bright sunlight, and I was in the darkest part of the tunnel. Even though there were lights, she couldn't see me down there. I tried yelling at her, but with race cars going over the top of the tunnel at speeds over 180 miles per hour, she couldn't hear me. After a few minutes, a stranger walked by, and I recruited him to go get my mom. She twisted the tire back on the rim easily because it was so loose and worn out, and she re-engaged my clutch. I thanked the stranger profusely. Years later, I told that story to my friend Kathy Breen, who served with me on St. Gabriel Church's finance committee. She said, "Yeah, I know that story. The man who helped you was my father. He was a sports journalist covering the race." I had no idea he was someone from my church. As comedian Stephen Wright says,
"Yeah, it's a small world, but I wouldn't want to paint it."
Apart from that story, I remembered that my second power chair did not have spoke front wheels, but the school wheelchair did. Therefore, the times I got stuck in the mud at the snake pit had to be in the earlier wheelchair during my high school days. I also recalled that sometime in my high school years, I purchased a mechanical stopwatch to time the cars. I know for a fact that I had it during high school because I offered to assist my high school science teacher, Mr. Irwin, in doing time trials for our Little 500 bicycle race. He was concerned I might not be very accurate, which I suppose was a legitimate concern. To push the button, I would hold the watch up to my chin. I would brace my elbow on the armrest of my wheelchair and then simply nod my head sharply down to trigger the watch. I think I was reasonably accurate. But anyway, I know I had the stopwatch during high school, and I wouldn't have bought it if I hadn't been going to the track on a regular basis. It probably wasn't until I was in college that I bought a new stopwatch. One day, while in the gift shop at the Speedway, I saw an electronic stopwatch with an LCD display. It would allow you to time 4 consecutive laps. See, the problem with a mechanical stopwatch is that you need 2 of them to time consecutive laps. The pit crews would mount 2 stopwatches on top of a clipboard. When the car came by on the first lap, you would start the first watch. On the next lap, you would stop the first one and start the second one simultaneously. Then you could write down the time from the first watch, reset it, and repeat the process. This electronic stopwatch would do that for you. Rather than hitting a stop button, you would press a split button. It would freeze the first lap time, but continue timing the next lap. You could see the lap time frozen, but it continued counting the next lap in the background. You would then press a continue button to see the next lap. After 4 laps, it would give you your total time. You could also configure it for the size of the track. The Indianapolis Motor Speedway is 2.5 miles. This stopwatch automatically converted the time into miles per hour for each lap and the 4-lap average. The watch cost $75, which was probably about the equivalent of $150 or more in today's money. But I absolutely had to have it. The guy in the gift shop let me try it out before I purchased it. It had 4 buttons, and they were slightly recessed in the front surface of the device. It was difficult to get my finger to poke down into the hole. I could barely work it. But I trusted my ingenuity and the mechanical skills of my dad. I bought the watch, brought it home, and told Dad we were going to take it apart and wire in some push buttons that I could use. There was every possibility that the process would totally destroy my brand new $75 stopwatch, but I was willing to take the risk. We did it. We soldered in a small ribbon cable about 18 inches long, and on the other end connected 4 microswitches. It worked beautifully. Now, that wasn't the only electronic gamble that my dad and I took to enhance my race watching experience. We performed the same kind of electronic surgery on an expensive video camera. We had a VHS VCR that was convertible. That is, it would convert from a tabletop VCR with a tuner and a timer into a portable recorder to which you could connect a camera. It was an RCA Select-Division VFP 170. It was in 2 pieces. One of the pieces was the tuner, power supply, and timer. The other piece detached, and it was the recording mechanism where you put in the tape. It had battery power so you could use it on the go when using the video camera. This was the early days of VCRs and home video cameras. It wasn't a camcorder, the likes of which you might be familiar. It was a camera and a recorder separately. I don't recall exactly when I purchased it, but some Google searches reveal it was released in 1981. And I'm certain I got it before the next model came out, so it had to be right around 81. The VCR had cost me about $1,200. I had purchased that particular model in anticipation of eventually purchasing a camera. A few years later, the camera cost $650. Again, this was the early 1980s, so you could probably double that in today's dollars. Most people had to carry the recorder in a shoulder bag or backpack and then hold the camera with a cable connecting to it. I simply put the camera bag on the back of my wheelchair. We mounted the camera on a homemade gimbal on my armrest. It would allow me to move the camera left or right or tilt up and down. The problem was, how do I press the pause and record button and work the zoom? The trigger mechanism was in the handle of the camera. We took it apart, wired in 3 micro switches on the end of the cable, and it all worked. With the recorder in my bag on the back of the wheelchair, my mom would hit the record and pause button. Then I could use my remote pause button to start and stop the camera, as well as to zoom in and out. As I mentioned, I've included some video I shot with that camera in the YouTube version of this podcast. You can also see photos I found online of that model VCR, as well as a similar VCR my Uncle Keith had. One time I borrowed his so I could use both VCRs to edit the tape. It's so much easier now that we can edit on computers. I would have had a lot of fun if I could have edited video on a PC back in those days. My goal each year was to get at least one brief video shot or still frame of every car that qualified that particular year. I think I only accomplished that one time, but I was very obsessive about it. I mentioned previously that I purchased a season pass, which would allow you entrance to the Speedway every day except race day, and it also included a garage pass. One day I was in Gasoline Alley garage area watching mechanics working on a car owned by Roger Penske. If you ask me who is my favorite driver, most of the time I'll say whoever's driving for Penske. Cars owned by Penske have won the Indy 500 a record 20 times, with the 20th win coming this year by Joseph Newgarden. Anyway, one of Penske's mechanics was admiring my camera setup. I told him how we had to take it apart, rewire it, and put it back together so I could use it. I also showed him my stopwatch, similarly modified. I said, I like buying high-tech toys and then gambling that I can modify them to do what I want them to do. He replied, sounds like my job here. But in my case, Roger is footing the bill. That is Roger Penske. Maybe that's why I'm such a huge Roger Penske fan. We aren't afraid to gamble with money to get the enjoyment we want. In November 2019, Penske purchased the entire Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the rights to the Indy 500 itself, and ownership of the entire IndyCar series from the Holman family for an undisclosed amount of money. When I heard about the purchase, I was very happy knowing that the facility was in good hands. I was never a big fan of the management of the Holman family, who had owned the Speedway since 1945. Penske put millions of dollars into upgrading the fan experience, including new restrooms, better video screens, better concession stands, and other amenities. Unfortunately, COVID hit, and the 2020 race was postponed from May to August and was run without fans in attendance. The fans would not get to use these new improvements until the following year. I sort of felt sorry for Roger putting all that money into upgrading the experience, and then there was no one there to enjoy it. Back in the day, touring the garage area with my video camera gave me great opportunities to talk to mechanics and some very famous race drivers. My most memorable encounter was the day I got to talk to racing legend Mario Andretti. Although he only won the Indy 500 once in 1964, he had amassed massive accomplishments, not only in IndyCar, but NASCAR, Formula One, and sports car endurance races at Le Mans. He was in front of his garage, sitting in a golf cart with his feet propped up. He was waiting for his crew to make some changes to the car. There was no one around. I rolled up and said hi. We had a very friendly conversation. Along the way I asked, "I heard on the radio you're going to go to Formula One racing full-time next year. It will not be back here." He replied, "Don't believe everything you hear." Hey, maybe I should have been a sports journalist. It sounded like I had a scoop straight from the source himself. Although he was very gracious and I didn't feel like I was intruding, I didn't want to bother him for long, so I moved along and said goodbye. A day or two later, I was watching some Penske mechanics work on a car, and someone walked up behind me and started leaning on my wheelchair. The person said, "How you doing, pal?" My reaction was, who the hell's calling me pal, and why the fuck are they leaning on my wheelchair? That's a big invasion of my space. The wheelchair is part of me. I'm not a piece of furniture you can lean on. I thought about just taking off, hoping they'd fall flat on their face. That'd teach them not to lean on wheelchairs. But instead, I just mumbled, I'm okay. After maybe 20 seconds, I could feel them let go and walk away. I turned around quickly to see who it was. It was Mario Andretti. Suddenly I was elated. Mario called me his pal. Mario called me his pal. Wow! If I could have jumped up and down, I would have. Hey, Mario can lean on my wheelchair any time he wants. By the way, my late cousin Nancy, who was also disabled and in a wheelchair, was a huge fan of Mario, and we have many photos and videos of her with the famous driver. He was always very gracious towards her. Anyway, fast forward to 2006. I'm at the movies watching the Disney Pixar feature Cars, because, of course, I'm not only a fan of racing, but of CGI computer graphics. It was a movie seemingly made just for me, combining all my interests. The film stars the voice talent of Paul Newman, who was once an accomplished race driver himself, as well as a substantial part for 7-time NASCAR champ Richard Petty, playing essentially himself, even though in the film they just referred to him as the King. Additionally, there are cameos by Darrell Waltrip, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Michael Schumacher, and none other than my pal, Mario Andretti. Mario's brief scene is 95 minutes into the film. A minor character named Fred is trying to get into the racetrack to watch his friend Lightning McQueen in the final race. Andretti is there and greets him saying, "Good morning to you, Fred." The Andretti character is looking down at Fred's bumper and sees his name on the license plate. That's the only reason he knew the character's name was Fred. Well, Fred is delighted and amazed that Mario knows his name. He jumps up and down, joyously shouting, "Mario knows who I am! Mario knows who I am!" I started laughing hysterically in the theater because he was exuding the same enthusiasm I got when the real Mario called me pal. People were looking around at me like, okay, it was funny, but not that funny. It was doubly funny for me because when I was about 6 years old, all the kids at Robert's school got to go to the Shrine Circus for a free matinee. Before the show began, a bunch of clowns came around to entertain all of us little handicapped kids. I've never been afraid of clowns, nor am I impressed by clowns. Even at that young age, I thought a clown was just some schmuck with goofy makeup on, doing cheap magic tricks and pratfalls. I wasn't impressed. But one clown came up to me, did some sort of bad sleight of hand trick, and then he called me by my name. That freaked me out. When I got home, I asked my mom, how could he have known my name? Mom said, you idiot, you got a name tag on. Okay, now I know how Fred felt. So that's what really happened. But I have a confession to make. That's not the story I've been telling for nearly 18 years. The way I've been telling the story was that in the movie, Mario was talking to one of those little tire-changing forklift characters, and he said to him, how you doing, pal? I thought it was in the next sentence that he referred to the character by name after reading his license plate with a name on it. Then I would go on to tell the story about the clown and my name tag. When recounting the tale previously, I would add, I guess Mario must call everyone pal, and that's why they wrote it into the story. So in preparing for the podcast, I thought I would go rewatch the scene. I logged into Disney Plus, found the film Cars, and looked for the scene. Much to my surprise, Mario never calls the guy pal. The story I've been telling for years isn't true. Here's a YouTube version of the scene in question. I hope I don't get a copyright strike for it.
Hey, you! No admittance without a garage pass!
Oh, it's okay. Lightning McQueen knows me.
Hey, Marco. It's a beautiful day for a race, isn't it?
Absolutely, Mr. Andretti.
And good morning to you, Fred.
Mario Andretti knows my name. You gotta let me in now.
Sorry, pal.
Now, I thought about telling my legendary version rather than the true version. However, I decided that for once I would tell the true story first, instead of using that old adage, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. That's what I usually do. I decided I would go ahead, tell the story right, and then tell the embellished version that I've been using all these years. So that's what I've done. I would bet good money that the Mario character in the film used the word pal, but I would have lost. Next week we'll tell just a couple more stories about my history as a race fan, including the first time I ever attended the race in person, and I will share with you a magazine article that I wrote about that experience. My second published article in Indianapolis Monthly Magazine. As I mentioned in an earlier episode, I'm cutting back from my weekly schedule of podcasts, so I can't say for certain when the next episode will be. I'm going to try going for every other week, but I can't guarantee that. My life is pretty complicated right now. So, if you find this podcast educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 a month. You'll get early access to the podcast and other exclusive content. I've got some big financial struggles right now, but I'm not really in this for the money. But every little bit helps. As always, my deepest thanks to my financial supporters. Your support means more to me than words can express. Even if you can't provide financial support, please post links and share the podcast on social media so I can grow my audience. I just want more people to be able to hear my stories. All my back episodes are available, and I encourage you to check them out if you're new to the podcast. If you have any comments, questions, or other feedback, please feel free to comment on any of the platforms where you find the podcast. I'll see you next time as we continue contemplating life. Until then, fly safe, everyone.